I never expected my 32nd birthday to start with the feeling that something was wrong, but the moment I stepped into the office, the air felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the way people avoided meeting my eyes, or the tight, forced smile from the receptionist, who usually greeted me with a genuine laugh. Whatever it was, it settled in my stomach like a cold stone, and I tried to shake it off by reminding myself that today was supposed to be a good day. I had spent 6 years building this company's most promising product feature. I kept telling myself they'd never push me aside, at least not today. As I walked toward my small workstation, I noticed the CTO, Evan, standing outside the glass conference room with his arms crossed tightly across his chest. He looked like he'd been waiting for me, which immediately made my pulse spike. For months, he had treated me like the awkward, disposable engineer who should be grateful just to breathe the same air as him, despite the fact that my prototypes were the only reason investors had taken us seriously. I watched him tilt his head slightly when he saw me, as if acknowledging a stray dog that wandered somewhere it didn't belong. Even then, I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, but deep down, I knew better. My workstation was exactly as I left it the night before, except for one detail. The files for my most recent designs were gone. Not misplaced, not accidentally shifted. Gone. The desktop folders I meticulously organized were empty, replaced by generic placeholder icons like someone had carefully erased me from my own computer. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the shared drive and found those folders empty too, as if I had never contributed a single thing to the company. That was the moment things started to click, in a way I didn't want them to. Before I could process any of it, Evan approached me with the stiff politeness of someone about to step on your throat while pretending to offer a handshake. He told me the CEO wanted to see me immediately, saying the word like I was already late for my own execution. His voice was calm, but the tension in his jaw betrayed how badly he wanted this moment. I followed him down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the smooth concrete floors, feeling strangely detached from my own body. I had no idea what they were hiding from me. The CEO, Marlene, sat behind her glass desk with her hands folded neatly on top of a stack of papers. She didn't look angry or frustrated, she looked rehearsed. That was somehow worse. I sat down across from her, and Evan positioned himself behind me like a silent enforcer, making the room feel smaller. Marlene cleared her throat before telling me they were moving in a different direction, which was the corporate way of saying I was no longer useful to them. Her voice was smooth, clipped, and disturbingly final, as if she'd practiced this speech all night. At first, I genuinely thought it was a joke. I asked for clarification, thinking maybe they wanted to shift me to another team or reconsider a project timeline. But when she slid the termination papers across the desk, my throat tightened so sharply I almost couldn't breathe. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't acknowledge that I had sacrificed countless nights, weekends, and every ounce of creativity I had to bring their flagship product to life. All she said was that my employment ended effective immediately. I signed nothing. My hands trembled, but not with fear. Something darker was brewing underneath the surface. I asked them why they were doing this, why on my birthday of all days, and why without warning after everything I had built. Marlene maintained her cold detachment, insisting it had nothing to do with my work performance. Evan smirked slightly behind me, believing I couldn't see him in the reflection of the glass wall. That was the moment everything changed. As I walked out of the conference room, their decision echoed in my head like metal scraping against concrete. Everyone avoided my gaze again, but now I understood why. They all knew. They had seen this coming, and I was the only one left in the dark while they quietly erased me from the company's memory. My badge deactivated as I tried to leave the elevator, embarrassing me in front of the interns who pretended not to notice. Humiliation burned through me, but beneath it was a spark I couldn't yet define. I stepped out of the building into the sharp morning air and finally let myself breathe. The city noise drowned out the ringing in my ears, and I felt a strange stillness settle over me. I hadn't cried. I hadn't yelled. I just walked away, holding on to one quiet truth they hadn't bothered to consider. I owned something they desperately needed, and firing me was the biggest mistake they could have made. I spent the first hour after leaving the building walking aimlessly through the city, replaying every detail of the morning until it all blended together into a hollow ache in my chest. The cold wind whipped against my face, but even that sharp sting didn't pull me out of the daze I was stuck in. I kept hearing Marlene's voice echoing in my head, steady and emotionless, as if firing me was as routine as checking her email. The birthday notifications from friends buzzed on my phone, each one a reminder of how quickly everything in my life had shifted. I couldn't bring myself to answer a single message. By the time I finally sat down on a bench near the river, the humiliation started sinking in deeper than the initial shock. My badge failing at the elevator replayed in my mind like a cruel joke I couldn't escape. I'd given that company 6 years of my life, only to be tossed out without warning, without dignity, without even acknowledgement of what I had created. Worse, no one even tried to stop it. Not a coworker, not a manager, not even the ones I'd mentored when they were still terrified interns. I felt disposable, like a temporary utility they had squeezed dry. But as I stared at the water swirling below the bridge, something started to shift inside me. I wasn't just fired. I was erased, wiped clean from their systems and their memories as if I had never existed within those walls. That kind of coordinated effort didn't happen by accident. The empty drives, the missing folders, the rehearsed speech, all of it pointed to a plan. And plans like that meant they needed something badly, something they no longer had access to. Later that afternoon, I received a message from Lydia, one of the only engineers I had really trusted. She told me she was so sorry about what happened, but seemed hesitant to say anything more. Her wording felt careful, like she was afraid someone might read it over her shoulder. When I asked her directly if she knew why they fired me, she waited almost 10 minutes before responding with a vague, "You didn't hear it from me." But leadership has been panicking for weeks. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen. That cryptic message pushed me to check my personal patent dashboard, something I had nearly forgotten about in the chaos of the morning. The moment I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Views on my main patent, the one tied to the adaptive sensor feature, had spiked dramatically in the last 72 hours. Higher than usual, higher than ever. Someone had been watching it, studying it, trying to understand it. Someone who clearly thought I wouldn't notice, especially not after being kicked out. Seeing that data made my hands tremble with a mix of anger and realization. The company must have assumed they owned all rights to anything I worked on. But what they never knew was that I had built the underlying concept on my own time, in my own workshop, long before they showed any interest in it. The official product version might have been developed internally, but the core mechanism, the one they absolutely needed for their upcoming launch, belonged solely to me. And now, without access to my drives, they couldn't manipulate or alter anything without exposing that gap. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the irony of it all. They fired me on my birthday to erase me before the launch, but in doing so, they had cut themselves off from the one thing that could save them. Still, the weight of what happened made my chest feel tight, and every breath came out shaky. I was angry, yes, but also hurt in a way I hadn't expected. All those late nights, the teamwork, the memories, they meant nothing to them. I meant nothing to them. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with all the lights off, except the dim glow of my laptop. I started gathering every document, every timeline, every dated sketch and notebook entry proving I had developed the concept independently. My hands steadied the more evidence I uncovered, strengthening the realization that the company had crossed a line, and worse, they thought I wouldn't fight back. They assumed I was compliant, timid, and too emotionally stunned to see through their plan. They believed I would disappear quietly, but things were about to get much worse for them. I didn't know exactly what they were preparing, but whatever it was, they needed my technology desperately, and they no longer had any legal right to touch it. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, the kind that comes from realizing the nightmare you lived through wasn't a dream. My apartment felt unnervingly silent, as if even the walls knew something had shifted in my world. I made coffee just to have something warm to hold, but the bitterness only reminded me of the resentment simmering in my chest. I kept replaying Lydia's warning and the sudden spike in views on my patent page, trying to fit the pieces together. By the time my mug was empty, I knew I had to dig deeper. I reached out to Lydia again, this time asking if we could talk somewhere privately, somewhere far away from the company's reach. Her reply came faster than I expected. "Meet me at the old cafe we used to go to." When I arrived, she was already seated in a back corner booth, her hoodie pulled low, her fingers tapping nervously against her cup. The moment she saw me, her expression cracked with guilt, and she motioned for me to sit. Before I could even ask, she whispered that she wasn't supposed to talk to me at all. That alone sent a chill down my spine. "Before they fired you," she said, leaning closer, "they had meetings about your project without you. Meetings where they talked about how to remove you cleanly." I felt my breath catch, and for a moment the cafe's background noise faded into a dull hum. She explained that the leadership team had spent weeks discussing how to launch the product with my feature but without me attached. Worse, they had convinced themselves I wouldn't put up a fight because I was too absorbed in the creative side to understand the business side. Hearing her say those words made something inside me fracture. They hadn't just underestimated me, they had actively exploited me. Then Lydia slid her phone across the table, the screen showing a forwarded chain of emails so shocking I felt physically nauseous. The first was from Evan, written with a smug confidence that practically oozed off the screen. He claimed he had handled the engineer and assured the team that the intellectual property claim won't be an issue because he's emotionally soft. My hands began to shake as I scrolled further, seeing email after email discussing my dismissal as a strategic move to avoid paying me royalties or giving me a cut of the launch profits. The betrayal burned hotter the more I read. One message in particular felt like a punch to the chest. Evan wrote, "He doesn't know the value of what he built. Fire him before he realizes the patent is still in his possession." I stared at the line so long my eyes blurred. They hadn't fired me because of budget cuts or internal restructuring. They had fired me to steal what I created. They fired me because they feared I might finally understand my own worth. The realization was both devastating and electrifying, like the moment lightning strikes just a few feet away. I leaned back in the booth, gripping the edge of the table to steady myself as Lydia watched with a worried frown. She told me the company was planning to announce the product at a huge investor showcase in 2 days, and the feature they were banking everything on was my original design. My blood ran cold as the implications hit me all at once. If they presented that feature publicly, they would be infringing on my patent in the most visible way possible. It would be both a disaster for them and the perfect opportunity for me to expose their manipulation. But the emotional weight of it all settled harder than the strategic implications. I trusted these people. I stayed late for them, covered deadlines for them, believed in their vision, even when it meant sacrificing my health and personal life. To them, I wasn't a partner, a creator, or even a human being. I was a tool one they believed they could discard the moment it became inconvenient. The realization left a bitter taste in my mouth, like something inside me had died. When I thanked Lydia and left the cafe, my legs felt unsteady, but my determination sharpened with every step. The city seemed louder than usual, the honking cars, rushing pedestrians, and distant construction all blending together into a chaotic backdrop that mirrored the storm in my chest. I knew what I had to do now, and there was no turning back. They thought they could erase me, but their arrogance had blinded them to the truth written clearly on the patent timestamp. I filed before they even drafted their first blueprint. As I walked home, the anger and betrayal twisted into something colder, sharper, more focused. The launch was in 48 hours, and they were about to walk straight into the worst legal trap they'd ever set for themselves. And the best part was, they had built it entirely on their own assumptions. This time, I wouldn't be the quiet engineer in the background. This time, they would see exactly who I was. By the next morning, the shock had cooled into a steady, controlled fire that pulsed beneath my skin. I woke with a sense of purpose sharper than anything I'd felt in years, the kind of clarity that comes only when you've been pushed too far. The betrayal still hurt every memory of late nights, shared victories, and team celebrations felt tainted, but now that pain had direction. I knew what they had tried to do, and I had proof. All that was left was deciding how to use it. The first call I made was to a lawyer recommended by one of my patent contacts, a soft-spoken woman named Elise who specialized in intellectual property disputes. When I explained the situation, she didn't respond with disbelief or pity. Instead, she let out a slow exhale, the kind professionals make when they can already see the outcome. She asked for every document, every timestamp, every email Lydia had shown me. I sent it all, my hands shaking not from fear anymore, but from the weight of how damning the evidence really was. Within an hour, Elise called me back with a tone that was calm but edged with something like excitement. "They're in deep trouble," she said plainly, "and they don't know it yet." Hearing those words made the tension in my chest ease for the first time since the firing. Elise explained how the company's plan wasn't just unethical, it was legally reckless. She confirmed that my patent, filed months before the company ever referenced the design, gave me full ownership of the core mechanism. If they demonstrated it publicly at the showcase, they would be committing blatant infringement in front of investors, media, and competitors. The arrogance of it was staggering. But arrogance, Elise reminded me, was often the downfall of people who thought they could exploit quiet minds. We spent the next few hours creating a meticulous strategy. Elise drafted an injunction that could be served the moment they showcased the feature. She also helped prepare a cease and desist tailored specifically for maximum impact when delivered publicly. With each step, I felt myself shedding that old version of me, the meek engineer who tolerated disrespect because he believed his work would speak for itself. Now my work would speak, but in a way they never expected. And this time, my voice wouldn't be ignored. By late afternoon, I had only one thing left to decide: whether to attend the event in person. Elise left the choice to me. But there was something satisfying necessary even about facing them on the very stage they planned to steal from me. I wanted to see the exact moment realization hit their faces. I wanted them to look me in the eyes and understand they'd been wrong about me all along. So I chose to go. The night before the launch, I barely slept. Not out of fear, but from the weight of anticipation. Images of Evan's smug grin flickered in and out of my mind, mingling with memories of being treated like a convenient tool. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every stolen late night replayed like warnings I had ignored. But not anymore. By the time morning light seeped through my curtains, I felt an eerie calm settle over me, the kind that comes before a storm. The event venue was already buzzing with energy when I arrived. Sleek banners lined the entrance, showcasing glossy images of the company's upcoming product. A massive screen looped promotional clips, each one highlighting the device, my device, and promising a revolutionary breakthrough. The irony was almost too much. I adjusted my jacket, clutched the folder Elise had prepared for me, and stepped inside. The main hall was bathed in cool blue lights, the kind meant to feel futuristic and clean. Rows of chairs filled the room, crowded with investors, reporters, tech influencers, every person the company wanted to impress. I kept to the back at first, blending into the shadows as I watched employees bustle around the stage. Then I saw Evan near the front, adjusting his tie with an overconfident smirk. Seeing him so sure of himself made my pulse thrum harder, but not from fear this time. It was anticipation. Marlene took the stage, her heels clicking sharply across the polished floor as she welcomed the audience. Her voice was steady, polished, practiced just like the day she fired me. As she spoke about innovation and teamwork, I felt a bitter laugh threaten to rise in my throat. When the lights dimmed slightly and the spotlight shifted toward the covered prototype on stage, the atmosphere grew electric. Cameras rose, conversations quieted, everyone leaned forward in anticipation. And so did I. My heartbeat thundered steadily as Marlene reached for the cloth draped over the device. I stepped out of the shadows then, moving down the side aisle with slow, deliberate confidence. A few people noticed, turning in confusion as I walked toward the stage. I saw Evan's expression shift from boredom to confusion to unmistakable alarm. He whispered something urgently to Marlene, but it was already too late. I kept walking. This was the moment everything had been leading toward. The moment I stepped into the aisle, time seemed to slow, stretching out each second as if the entire room sensed that something was about to go very, very wrong. My footsteps echoed across the polished floor, louder than the murmurs rising from the audience. The blue stage lights reflected off the glossy banners, casting sharp shadows that made everything feel unnervingly cinematic. Marlene's hand froze above the cloth, her smile flickering as she squinted out into the darkened seating area. Evan stood beside her, his posture rigid and his jaw visibly tightening. For the first time in years of working with him, I saw fear break through his practiced confidence. I didn't rush. That was the point. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of my presence settle across the room like a heavy curtain. Phones began to lift as people recognized me, whispering in confusion. Someone near the front muttered my name in surprise. I kept my gaze locked on the stage, on the two people who thought they could erase me without consequence. Each step grounded me, steadying the storm inside my chest. When I reached the foot of the stairs and began to climb, Marlene's smile vanished completely. "Excuse me," she said, her voice strained through the speakers. "This is a private—" "No," I interrupted, my voice firm and carried by the microphone I no longer needed to touch. "This is the perfect place." A ripple of shock moved across the room. The lighting technicians hesitated over their controls. Investors leaned forward. Even the camera crew shifted, sensing a shift too electric to ignore. Evan took a step toward me, as if he could physically stop what was coming. But Elise had coached me thoroughly. I lifted the folder in my hand and spoke with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. "My name is well, you already know my name," I said, my tone slicing through the silence. "And I have something very important to share before this company unveils technology that doesn't belong to them." Marlene stiffened, attempting to regain control. "Security!" She snapped toward the side of the stage. "Please remove." "You might want to hear me out first," I said, unfolding the first document and holding it toward the audience cameras, which immediately zoomed in. "This is the patent for the adaptive sensor mechanism your flagship product relies on. Filed by me, owned by me, months before this company even drafted its first internal notes." Gasps erupted around the room. A few investors immediately pulled out their phones. Reporters scrambled to aim their cameras directly at me, and Evan, who had always seemed so composed, went pale enough to match the white stage floor. I handed the next set of documents to the nearest event staff member, who accepted them with trembling hands. "And here," I continued, "is the injunction prepared by my attorney, effective immediately. This company is legally prohibited from demonstrating, selling, marketing, or distributing any product containing my patented work." Marlene looked like she'd been punched. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again with no sound coming out. Evan stepped forward, trying to salvage control with a forced laugh. "This is absurd," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "You did that work here. It belongs to the company by default." I met his eyes and watched panic bloom beneath his bravado. "That would have been convenient for you," I replied calmly, "if it were true. But the patent's timestamp and your own emails tell a different story, Evan." He froze. That single moment, the realization that their private conversation had made its way into my hands was almost too satisfying to describe. A roar of whispers erupted as the truth settled across the room like a storm cloud. Investors rose from their seats, demanding explanations. The board members at the front row exchanged horrified glances. Marlene tried to speak again, but her voice cracked under the pressure. Elise appeared from the audience then, walking toward the stage with confident, measured steps. She addressed the room with a professionalism that contrasted beautifully with the chaos unfolding around us. "All necessary documents have been formally served," she announced. "Any further attempt to present or distribute this technology constitutes willful infringement punishable under federal law." That was the breaking point. Investors stormed out. A few reporters rushed forward, hurling questions at Marlene and Evan, who both looked as though the floor had dropped beneath them. The security team hesitated, unsure who they were even supposed to escort out anymore. The event dissolved into disarray within minutes. Justice had a sound, and it was absolute chaos. In the days that followed, the company's stock plummeted as news outlets replayed the confrontation on loop. The board moved quickly, firing Evan almost immediately and placing Marlene on indefinite leave. They reached out to Elise, desperate to negotiate, terrified of a prolonged legal battle. And eventually, after days of watching them twist in the wind, I agreed to a settlement that secured both compensation and a lucrative licensing agreement, one that placed the rightful ownership firmly in my hands. On the morning I signed the final documents, I felt something settle inside me, a strange blend of victory, closure, and peace. I had walked away with more than justice. I had reclaimed my dignity, my work, and my future. And as I celebrated my belated birthday with friends who cared, I realized something simple but profound. They didn't fire me out of strength. They fired me because they knew exactly how powerful I was.